Hi everyone, thank you for coming. It's nice to be back here at ReMODEL in the expanded ReMODEL field. This talk is called Soul Kitchen versus Art Prison. Sculpture, the sacred guardian of cultured ideals. Soul Kitchen was last year. Part of what I'm going to do is a recapitulation of last year's talk and then kind of unpack some goods and try to expand it. And so I was talking about Soul Kitchen as being kind of like a liberal arts model and how sculpture is taught and contemplative art. And the words art and prison got put together at another symposium that I was involved in, where I presented the information that California, since 1980, California has built 20 new prisons and 1 new university. So by the capitalist competitive model, how art could survive would be by making an art prison. Last year, I broke out Athena Parthenos and did this kind of nihilistic, materialist, forensic, cultural archaeology, and tried to dissect this sculpture of classical antiquity that was at the birth of the Academy in Athens and compare it to a recent sculpture in our contemporary art arena. The hope was to gain some insight into the belief system and culture that creates art and pedagogy, and maybe find out what the intent is then and now, and especially here in this kind of gorgeous liberal arts environment that we find ourselves in today. So the Athena Parthenos was a renowned sculpture, 438 BCE, she's 40 foot tall. This is a recreation done in Nashville, Tennessee. She is a chryselephantine, which is ivory, gold on bronze with a wood armature, and she's rumored to have been in a pool of virgin olive oil. According to Vedic and Taoist theory, all of her elements actually are male. So what we see is a female representation on the outside by an elemental analysis using Vedic and Taoist thought that qualifies as her interior qualifies as male elements. It also is worth talking about that she is public. So what could she, if we're using sculpture, try to use sculpture as a lens to look into the belief system of our culture and pedagogy. I talked about her as representing a maternal eternalist belief system. That's one that's matrilineal, believes in reincarnation and the concept of Atman or in higher beings. Incidentally, this is also the time of Plato teaching the Socratic method, that humankind should question the world around them. And this harbored a turn from the agrarian society, and at that time Greece was a superpower in its region, selling olive oil and olives. And there was a turn towards a kind of city intellectualism, where people were living in cities and debating, and this is often thought of as being the birthplace for the Academy. In the city intellectualism, the goal was to create an egalitarian society where one was judged not by their caste or gender, but by what they could do in this lifetime. Today, we have For Heaven's Sake. This is 2008, 3.5 inches by 3.5 inches by 4 inches, cast platinum, pink and white diamonds by Damien Hirst. So looking at this is on the symbolic plane and symbolic transmission of information. What does this represent in terms of a belief system? I'm calling this belief system an infantile, nihilistic, materialist one. It's patrilineal. Non-Atman generally does not believe in a higher self or in reincarnation. The dominant elements distinguished by Vedic and Taoist systems are female. They're actually talismans of the goddess Venus and the goddess and the planet of love and the goddess Venus. And although it's non-gender specific on the outside, it's actually female on the inside in terms of its elemental content. Bell Hooks has this definition of nihilism that says, nihilism is a direct consequence of the helplessness and powerlessness that unrelenting class exploitation and oppression produce in a culture where everyone, no matter their class, is socialized to desire wealth, to define their value, if not overall meaning of their lives, by material status. Now for something concrete. In classical antiquity, the liberal arts denoted those subjects of study that were considered essential for a free person, Latin liber, free, to master in order to acquire those qualities that distinguished a free person from slaves, the latter of whom formed the greater number of the population in the classical world. Contrary to popular belief, freeborn girls were as likely to receive formal education as boys during the Roman Empire, and unlike the lack of education and purely manual and technical skills proper to what they're calling a slave here. So now for something more concrete, asking a question, what are schools for? This book by Ron Miller, The Holistic Education in American Culture, talks about four assumptions and 5 themes in American education that are pertinent. I'd like to start off with this quote from Howard Zinn. He says, you find very often that what you learn in graduate school is what you learned in elementary school, only with footnotes. You see, no, I never learned about the mutinies. This is when he was trying to write A People's History of the United States, 1492 to present. And in other history books, he couldn't find representation and documentation of the pro-humanist, anti-capitalist uprisings that seriously questioned authority, exploitation, and discrimination. In America, we assume that schools exist to transmit a certain body of knowledge and a certain set of values. We assume that the community and the state have the obligation and the right to discipline children's minds and abilities into occupations deemed useful. Which body of knowledge and set of values is quarreled over by different interest groups, but they do not quarrel over these basic assumptions. We assume we live in a democracy. Yet the political system we actually live in is derivative from English law that was developed in the 1600s and 1700s and was designed to permit the king and a small number of nobles to colonize and expand the English empire through the acquisition and privatization of property and the exploitation of labor. We now live by similar laws that actually protect laws of property and commerce over the rights of people, communities, and nature. This situation might best be described as a sort of corporate state. And the final assumption is that we assume that there is a division between church and state. The 5 themes that are important in American education is first, a particular religious worldview of Calvinist and Puritan theology. It's basically a religion of exile that says humankind is corrupt and must be turned from rebellion to willing obedience. The Puritans were the first to mandate mandatory literacy for children so they could study the Bible and the laws of capital. The second theme is a Cartesian and Baconian based thought system that relies on a fascination with the power of concept, science, and technology, stresses a mechanistic and reductionist and materialist mentality. Bacon is responsible for the division of church and state, Descartes, deification of thought and ego, I think, therefore I am, and the Cartesian coordinate system and analytic geometry that are considered to be a critical link in modern-day computer technology. The third theme is restrained pseudo-democratic ideology that celebrates freedom and individualism within definite boundaries of social discipline. The fourth, capitalism, an economic system that emphasizes competition and the protection of self-interest, especially in the form of acquisition of property and wealth and the exploitation of labor. The fifth and final one is nationalism, the belief that the state or country is somehow the sacred guardian of cultural ideals. I just changed that in the title to be Sculpture is the sacred guardian of cultural ideals, because I thought it sounded better for our event today. Capitalism and sculpture go well together because they don't compete for the same sort of material to identify themselves. Capitalism is based on competition. Sculpture is based in contemplation. So they never have to compete with each other. Capitalism has a superpower, though, and that's the power of rewriting. It can rewrite just about anything to become self-referential and to make itself look good. This is some research done by a scientist, author named David Loy, and he looked at some of Darwin's work, and I'm going to read a quote from him. Darwin and what is the other fellow's name? Darwin and Herbert Spencer are in collaboration in terms of for this term "survival of the fittest." It was actually Herbert Spencer that reading Charles Darwin's theory of natural selection, who coined the term. But capitalism has taken that to be its kind of slogan. So David Loy, having gained my credentials, prestigious faculty post, and a publication of influential books as a psychologist, sociologist, and evolutionary systems scientist, I decided to apply what is known as content analysis by word count to Darwin's Descent of Man. In The Descent of Man, Darwin writes 95 times about love. On moral sensitivity, I found he wrote 92 times. Of cooperation, called mutual aid in Darwin's time, 27 times. And of competition, he wrote only 12 times. So you can see this rewriting, how Darwin is kind of rewritten as this kind of show pony for capitalism, when in fact he was more, say, pro-humanist. But to compare the superpowers of capitalism versus sculpture, sculpture actually has two superpowers. The first is to reveal. Under the paving stones, the beach. The second superpower is to see the beauty in the streets, rebuild and continually rebuild with revelations and with the paving stones. Thank you.